How are we? So today we're going to just look at the final section of our coursework, thanks be to God, and it's called Economic Inequality. So we've learned what the economy is. The economy is something that has jobs in it, it creates money. If you look at our crisis at the moment with the coronavirus, we haven't got people out working. Restaurants and shops are shut, bars are shut, hotels are shut. So we're worried about all these people not working because we need people to work and we need people to buy goods in order to keep the economy running because we want money. So I suppose if we look at economic inequality, is every country the same economic wise? No. Like, put this coronavirus crisis aside, our Irish economy is very good, but we can't compare ourselves to an economy of, we'll say, Zimbabwe or Lesotho because they're extremely poor. So every country has a different economy, okay? So in economic terms, we can divide the world into developed economies, that would be us, quickly developing economies, so they're catching up with us, and slowly developing economies. There must be things like war and stuff like that that's preventing them from developing. Okay, so across the world you can see the different colours on the screen in front of you. We're all at different economic levels. So some countries are developing faster than others. Many Asian countries are quickly developing while many African countries are slowly developing. We know why the Asian countries are quickly developing because we're relocating our factories out there. Labour is cheap. They can produce a lot of goods for very cheap and quickly for us. So they've created a lot of jobs there. So that's growing their economy. Whereas in Africa, they're finding it very hard to develop because of war, because of the spread of deserts there. People don't want to locate their businesses there, therefore they're not really creating many jobs. So let's look very quickly at developed economies. So that's made up of the wealthy countries, mostly in the northern hemisphere. Also, obviously, it would include Australia and New Zealand in the southern hemisphere. So wealthy economies really are the rich countries, okay? Developed economies, I should say, are the rich countries. So if we even look at in East Asia, they have a few developed economies as well that you mightn't have considered. Japan are doing fantastic. Like they make loads of manufactured, like high quality manufactured goods. South Korea, Taiwan, they're all in the developed world. Even if you're to remember just one out of that, Japan. So developed economies, we're talking Ireland, we're talking Germany, we're talking France, we're talking Japan. Okay? These countries in East Asia are major exporters of manufactured goods. So they manufacture high quality goods, computer parts, TVs, camcorders, expensive goods. We're not talking about your little purse or your handbag or your shoes for a tenner that you're buying in pennies. We're talking about expensive goods, your smart TVs that are costing €1,000. They're manufacturing high quality goods, okay? So that's, creating good money in the economy over there. They're getting a load of money back for it. So they export these products, so they've got a good economy. In the developed world, in developed economies, the majority of us work in services, and we have learned that if you work in services, you're earning the most money. Okay, you want your people in your country to work mostly in services, in tertiary services. Okay, so it brings in the most money. What else is our developed economies and rich countries like? Infrastructure such as roads, electricity, water supplies are of a very high standard. They rarely fail. If roads need to get upgrades, they're upgraded yearly. We have a budget every year to upgrade our roads. Electricity rarely fails us, in fairness. Our water supplies are always kept clean and filtered. So we are very, very much living in a developed economy where we've a lot of jobs, our wages are high, our services are very good. If you look at quickly developing countries, they're found in the developing world. Now, their economies are growing at a fast rate. Okay, so that's good. So where would we find quickly developing economies? A lot of the time you'd find them in Latin America. So we're talking about, I suppose, a lot of South America there. So you're talking about Brazil, those kind of regions. Countries in Southeast Asia as well would also be rapidly developing because of manufacturing of export goods. China would be an example, of a region that's quickly developing its economy. Okay, it's got a lot of jobs, it's got a lot of people employed, mightn't be earning the best of wages, but they're catching up with us. Okay, so what countries are we talking about in the Asian region? We're talking China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, parts of India. So quickly developing economies are growing their economies fast. In South America, we're talking about Brazil. In Asia, we're looking at China. Oil producing countries of the Middle East as well, such as Saudi Arabia, are developing rapidly. I mean, they're going to catch up with us in no time because the oil is literally making them a fortune. Okay? So now these quickly developing economies were, I suppose, once very, very poor regions, but the living standards are improving for people. Think of China, their living standards are improving. They're not fully there yet. They might not have access to education and healthcare, but they're getting there. Then you look at slowly developing economies. Okay, at least 50 countries are very poor in this world. Most of them, a lot of them I should say, are in sub-Saharan Africa. So anywhere that's close to the Sahara Desert, and just in general, a lot of countries in Africa are very, very poor, but mostly those regions around the Sahara Desert, okay? Africa has more poor countries than any other continent. It's very hard to grow their economies, so they're slowly developing economies. Very hard to attract jobs there. In Asia, if we look at Afghanistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, very, very poor regions, severe poverty, okay? So, what do these poorest of the poorest countries look like with slowly developing economies? Some of them are landlocked. Now, like Mali, for example, if you're a landlocked country, it's very hard for you to export goods because you've no access to the coast. So you have to get your goods via truck to the neighbouring country and then to the coastline. So that's very expensive. Some of these poor countries are experiencing civil wars. So no one wants to set up a business there during that time. Many of these countries have crippling foreign debts. They're trying to repay these debts back. So what's happening is any money that they do get in, they're spending it on repaying the debts and they're not spending it in education and healthcare. If they're not spending money on education, their people aren't getting skilled. So you can't attract in companies if you don't have a skilled workforce. And if their health is really bad because you haven't got good healthcare for them, how am I supposed to know if I can employ them and they're going to be healthy enough to work for me? So these are some characteristics of very, very poor economies. Okay? So the debts are really crippling them. A lot of these very poor countries with slowly developing economies have corrupt leaders. And those leaders are stealing a load of the money that's coming in through taxes. So they're stealing from their own people. So it's very, very hard for them to improve their standard of living. Okay? They also have a huge population growth. A load of babies being born. So it's very, very hard for the government to improve the standard of living of people when they keep having to, I suppose, try to feed the mouths of all the children that are being born. It's just crippling them. AIDS is a huge problem in these very, very poor regions, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. People are dying very, very young from it. So again, very, very hard to attract companies to locate there, to create jobs. When you have war, you've got AIDS, you've got them paying back debts, you've got corrupt leadership, etc. Okay, so I hope you understood about the quickly developing economies, slowly developing economies, and ourselves, the developed economies. You just need to know it very briefly. Now, very quickly, let's look at this. So, we're going to look at the exploitation of poor countries by wealthy countries. Have wealthy countries exploited poor countries in the past? Of course they have, and they're still doing it. The rich and powerful countries have always exploited the poor. They've been taking all their resources from centuries ago, and they still continue to do that. So throughout history, developed countries have always exploited the poorer or the less developed countries. Even today, rich countries dominate the world markets. It makes it very difficult for those poor countries to develop economically. And in another video, I'm going to show you about the coffee trade and how they grow all the coffee beans, these poor countries, but we're making most of the money out of it and we've total control over them with regards to that, and it's just dreadful. Okay, so all of this is called colonisation, and any of you doing history will know of this. It's when you go over and you take over a country, you take their resources and you leave them in extreme poverty. You have control over them. I suppose in the past, Columbus discovered the New World in 1492. He travelled on his boat. He wanted to discover America. He went on his voyage to colonise America in 1492. Okay, Spain and Portugal colonised Latin America. A lot of European countries actually went and discovered a lot of African and South American regions. Spain, what was over there in South America that they wanted? They wanted the gold and the silver. They wanted to bring it back to Europe to make money out of it. Spanish and Portuguese colonists stole land from the native people. So they arrived, Spanish and Portuguese people arrived in South America and literally had the weapons and the manpower to literally take over the land from the natives. So they were powerless against them. They had no weapons. They couldn't fight against them. And they stayed there for centuries, taking their gold and their silver and whatever other resources they had. The Spanish and Portuguese brought these resources back to Europe, sold them and made a fortune. The scramble for Africa. Everybody wanted Africa back then. Britain, France, other European countries, Spain, Portugal, they all rushed to divide Africa between them. So what did they want? Gold, diamonds, copper, cotton for making clothes, mahogany for making furniture, palm oil is in a load of the foods that we eat. So they were just all wanted a slice of the cake in Africa, basically. They wanted to come take the resources. And it's desperate because these resources essentially belong to the African people. And if they had it for themselves, they could have made money out of it. And maybe they wouldn't be living in the poverty that they're in today. So it's dreadfully sad. So we wanted the gold, wanted their diamonds, they wanted their copper, cotton, mahogany, because that's expensive furniture. Palm oil, which is used in a lot of foods, it's used to make Nutella. The amount of trees that they cut down to make that. So there was a lot basically. That map is brilliant. The crude oil, the uranium to make the nuclear power, the gold for our jewellery, the coffee for our mugs of coffee every day, our tea, diamonds, iron ore for making iron and steel. There's just loads. Africa was a mine of resources. So what do? The colonies, these poor countries, they were used as sources of cheap raw materials to benefit the colonial rich countries. So a lot of the EU countries, sadly enough, like France and Portugal and Spain and the UK, they became wealthy while the regions in Africa and South America just became poorer, even though the resources essentially belonged to them. We were exploited when we were taken over by Britain. We were exploited for centuries up until we got our independence from them in 1922. And you might be thinking, what did they come here for? They came here for our oak. We were covered in oak forests. Oak is a very good timber. They used it for shipbuilding. They came over for food. We were a very much agricultural country, so they came over and they took over our farms and they took our barley, our wheat, our oats, exported it back over to Britain, sold it, made a fortune. They loved taking over our cattle, our beef cattle. They exported them over, great quality beef. Even during the famine, and this is shameful, when literally millions died or migrated and left Ireland, we still exported out our exports and our food over to Britain, even though we had millions dying here. So that'll tell you how bad and rotten colonisation is. Even after independence, 96% of our exports out of Ireland still went to Britain. So they were continued to take our cattle and our butter, even though they weren't in control of us anymore. But they were all we knew. It was like we're after breaking up with them, but we didn't know who else to meet. We didn't know who else to sell our stuff to. So they still only gave us pittance for what we were producing to them. You know, if we'd sold it to other people, we would have demanded a higher money for it, but the Brits only give us a small amount. Since the 1960s, our butter prices have been improving and it's in huge demand. You can get it in most European countries, even in America. So I suppose the best thing for Ireland was after 1973, we joined the European Union. And then we started to reduce our dependency in the UK and we started to export to France and Germany and Italy and Spain and Portugal. So that was really good. That improved our economy. You can see in front of you our top 5 export destinations. I suppose what's unusual, this was obviously made before Brexit. By 2030, most of our exports will be going to the UK. That could very, very much change. It could be USA, France, Germany, China, and then maybe UK at the bottom. I suppose time will tell. Okay, we have broken our link with our colonial past. It was dreadfully unfair what they did to us, but that's colonisation. I suppose when you look at Africa today, even though all these African countries are independent for a long time, they're still very, very poor. This is because of world trade. World trade nowadays is still so unfair. So what's happening is these poor countries still export goods and raw materials to the rich north, but the prices have declined in recent decades. So basically, they're trying to produce more to earn the same amount that they used to earn. We're just paying them nothing. We're paying them very, very little for their goods. That's what's happening. They're too dependent in exporting 1 or 2 raw materials, and the prices can fluctuate or decline. like coffee beans. There's so many people producing coffee beans and so many people producing oil at the moment that the prices are dropping, and that's dangerous for their economy. Then they can go into extreme poverty. When they're not selling enough of their goods, or they're not making the price that they need to make, they can't pay their debts. Okay, and if they can't pay their debts, then they're even in more trouble. So that's just a quick summary of economic inequality and how colonisation has left so many places poor and has left regions like Africa still so reliant on their former colonial powers. Okay, so we'll resume this tomorrow and we'll look at world